a big goal should really be there, not to impress people. It's to inform how we behave today so that we know we're on track. When we work backwards, we have a lot more confidence that we're at least heading in the right direction. Even if we don't know specifically what to do, it gets us directionally right.
That is author Jay Papasan discussing his outlook for getting important things done, which he describes in his book, The One Thing, which we discussed today on this episode. A helpful book for defining what's key for you in your life, what you want to get done over time. And what I like about it is that it's not just about professional goals, but it also covers health goals, personal goals, relationship goals, and more. So widely applicable and worth looking into. This is Ty, your host. Thanks for listening to the Jalapeno Podcast, and please enjoy my conversation with Jay Papasan. Jay Papasan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ty. I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. The show itself is meant to be entertaining, of course, but also hopefully educational. And so having you on as someone who thinks about their work as something that can be presented for others' benefit is certainly a privilege. So really appreciate you being on and look forward to talking more about your work.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Maybe to start off, Jay, just give us a little bit about what it is you do.
Sure. I've been working in publishing in one facet or another for, I guess now, a little over 20 years. And even farther back, if you want to count working in bookstores, going through college. I was an editor at HarperCollins before I relocated to Austin with my wife back in 2000 and found myself working with Keller Williams. And then within a couple of years, started working with the founder, Gary Keller, and we started writing books together. Mm-hmm. We now have a publishing company. I'm a vice president in the franchise real estate company running education, as well as the publishing department, as well as the publishing company and a training company. So my roles have changed a lot, but at the heart of all of it is I try to create content based on research and models. And mostly my love and passion is translating that into books, but obviously can do it with courses and training as well.
Right. And the work that you've done to synthesize all of your learnings in the real world, in this case in your work in real estate and publishing, and then putting that into what we're going to focus on today, is your book, The One Thing.
Yeah, The One Thing is obviously our most recent work. It sold most recently, I think we're at 1.7 million copies in 35 languages, over 500 appearances on bestseller lists. That's been, as an author, like everybody dreams of that and feel blessed. We also wrote several other best-selling books on how to build a real estate career, how to invest in real estate, the biggest of which was The Millionaire Real Estate Agent, which has also sold over 1 million copies. So mostly a lot of this stage of my career has been focused on how to service the real estate transaction or how to invest in real estate. But the last 7 years has really been focused on productivity and purpose. And that's really the message of The One Thing.
And which is why it's appealing, I think, to any type of audience, anyone who's trying to accomplish anything, because the idea is that you're going to define the one thing, the highest purpose, your highest goal, your most important priority, and then sort of build your life and your day around achieving that thing.
That's correct. And, it's not the only thing. Everybody thinks that one thing means that everything else doesn't matter, and that would be out of touch with reality. But I think most people listening have experienced a time in their life, maybe they have to go all the way back to college and finals week of their last semester, or doing their thesis if they were in grad school, where they had something that they knew was absolutely most important, and everything else revolved around that. And that's what we're trying to get people to tap into on a daily basis. If you really understand the activities that lead to your greatest results, the things that will give you the most career opportunity, business opportunity, and frankly, I think joy in life, we should be giving those things our full attention, and everything else should wait in line behind those things. So we believe a simple infrastructure for doing that. It's not necessarily easy, but it's not complicated.
Yeah, and I think I always like to zoom out a little bit, and I guess the reason why you should consider, at least do the work internally to think about what would be your one thing, is because we're here on this planet for a relatively short amount of time, and if you know what you want, if your values are in line and your goals are in service to those values, then your existence and your time here is going to be better spent, more richly spent, in a sense of, you're more inquisitive, you're more alive, you're more contributive, and you're kind of actively learning because you're on the quest for something that you've defined for yourself.
Absolutely. One of the ways to restate what you just said or add to it, and it's not at the beginning of our book, but at the end, a lot of what Gary wanted to achieve is to give people an approach to life by which they would have no regrets at the end of it. I think when people aren't in touch with those important things, don't have their purpose as a compass, they often do look back and have some serious regrets. And so that's one way of looking at this is, getting you in touch with those things that actually matter a lot more than getting a raise this year or whatever that, current thing is that's at top of mind.
Yeah.
There are bigger things actually than those.
Yeah. And I want to get into the 11th chapter in your book in particular. But first, why don't we cover, what's the alternative? The alternative is what most of us are doing, which is trying to do a million things at once and getting exhausted as a result.
True. And that's kind of why we let off the book with, the lies, and it's the stuff that gets in the way. And I think most people, I don't think that they are trying to defend it, but they treat everything like it matters equally. And I think if you're working from a to-do list, if you've got, whatever the latest app is, so you can make sure that you don't forget all the things that you really believe that you should or could or have to do, you end up becoming a person who's just absolutely going crazy. There's never enough time to do it all, and things are always slipping through. And when we try to do everything and give everything equal access to our time and resources, our focus, we tend not to do any of them very well.
Right.
So we feel a lot of stress. We don't have great results. We talk about, instead of doing more things with side effects, as in your health, do fewer things with more effect. And so the first goal is just to realize that when you look at your list, not everything there matters equally. And if we take just a moment, it's pretty easy to identify the things that matter most. And if we just start with those, most of the other things will take care of themselves.
And can we run through an example? I think that'd be helpful.
Sure. We talk about extreme Pareto. So, if you're listening to this and you have a to-do list, it's kind of easy to follow along. Just pull up your app or whatever. The principle we want to work from is the 80-20, and sometimes known as Pareto's principle. And it's kind of a law of business. I definitely see that it shows up a lot. It's the minority of what we do gives us the majority of our results. And often that turns out to be 20% of what we do gives us 80%. Not always, but often. But it's always disproportionate. In my industry, real estate, 10% of the agents sell more than half of all of the real estate.
Wow.
So if you win with that 10%, you're really in the game. So there's always a cohort of tasks or people that if you focus on them gives you greater impact. So the first way to kind of turn your to-do list into what we call as a success list would be, all right, I've got all this stuff that I think I could do. What are the handful of things I really should do according to Pareto's principle? What's the 20%? So if you have a list of 25, can you identify 5 things off that list? Right? If I've just done my math right, maybe it's 20 and then you go to 5. No, that's 25. No, it's 20. It's 5 out of 25. There, I'm not incorrect. So the first step is just to identify the things that matter most. So, okay, there's a handful of things that if I do them, they're going to deliver far more results than the other things. As a writer, I know that if I'm not regularly reading books, right, I'm inputting into my brain new ideas. If I'm not regularly writing, outputting, I'll never have much to show for it.
Right.
The other ones are going to be you have to edit what you write, and then you have to market what you write. It's not a lot of things, and none of them are particularly easy,
Right.
but it's also just a handful of things that if I make sure I'm doing them, my career goals are going to happen
Yeah.
if I do them well. So you identify them, and the next step is just if I can only do one of these 5 activities, which one would it be? And I'm shortening the question. We can get to that later. But if I only get to do one, what's that? Great. Then you put a number 1 by it. If I had time left over and could tackle a second, what would be the second item from the remaining 4? And then that gets number 2. And you work your way until you have 1 through 5.
Mm-hmm.
And then now you have a success list. And if you actually start with number 1, lead your days with it, you're going to get far better results than people who just tackle the list at 25.
And what is it? You said lead your days with it. So what is that? How does that manifest?
Well, we have this ability to focus on what matters. It's called willpower. And that early in the day, we tend to have more. And you're early in the day may not be the same as me if I work nights, right? But when we first wake up, this is a natural biological process. We've taken the food that we've eaten before, and we've now stored that in our muscles. And that gives us a better supply. And when people make decisions, when they say yes to things and say no to things, we can actually measure the glucose levels in their bloodstream, and we can show that it's diminished after the decision. So our ability to make great decision is somewhat biological. Now, there's motivation and some other things, but there is this real physical aspect, and it's been measured time and time again. When people run out of decision-making power, they don't necessarily make bad decisions, but they fall back on their default. It's why, for instance, at the end of a long week on a Friday night, we often are ordering takeout for our kids, even though we know that's not the best meal for them. It's just an easy button, and we do it. Because otherwise, it would take a little bit more mental framework to do that. But early in the day, we have the ability to say yes to what matters most. And we advocate actually making appointments with yourself then. We call it time blocking, and we can go deep into that if you want. But you're going to make appointments with yourself early in the day to do your number 1. And when people do that, they do that simple process of navigating their time and saying, on these days, at this time, I will do X activity, and they put it in their calendar. Our research shows that they're about 3 more times more likely to do it.
Wow. And so when you're thinking about your one thing, in the grand scheme of things, how far out are you typically going? Because once you've defined it, if I recall correctly, you're backing into it. So it's, a year goal, and then you break that down. How do I need to get there month to month, week to week? And then how do I need to structure my day so that I'm hitting these checkpoints in service to that larger goal? But can you talk more about the various time frames that are deployed and when you think about these things?
The part of the book you're referencing is called Goal Setting to the Now. And it's one of the more valuable sections of the book, and I've never seen anyone really write about it the way that Gary shared with me, and we got to capture in the book together. But if you really want to live a life of no regrets, you're actually going to look out pretty far. So usually when people pick up the book, I first start with, can you tell me what your one thing is? What's the one thing you can do, right? And most people know the answer, and they will tell you often that they feel a little guilty for not focusing on it more. And I usually get them starting forward. A little way into that journey, when they have a little confidence that doing their one thing actually pays off, I'll usually walk them through a goal setting to the now exercise. So goal setting to the now is about taking something far in the future, someday, right? It's beyond 5 years, which is, in this technological day and age, feels like a lifetime. Yeah. Because things change so rapidly. But you're going way out and saying, someday I would like to be, or I would like to have, or I would like to do X, right? I would like to be a pilot someday. And then you start working your way backwards. From there, you would go, based on my 5-year goal, what would I have to accomplish in 1 year? And now we start to get kind of specific, because a lot of us can kind of look at something down the road and say, well, I probably should do this thing this year, right? And so you would then set a goal for the year, and then you'd say, based on my annual goal, what do I do this month? Based on my monthly goal, what do I do this week? Based on my weekly goal, what do I do today? Based on my daily goal, what do I do right now? And the whole point is you're taking a framework that's very distant and you're working backwards so you know how to behave today, which is really the purpose of a goal. A big goal should really be there, not to impress people. It's to inform how we behave today so that we know we're on track. The challenge is when we work forwards instead of backwards, it's very easy to get off track. We can chase the low-hanging fruit, which often is in the wrong direction. But when we work backwards, we have a lot more confidence that we're at least heading in the right direction. Even if we don't know specifically what to do, it gets us directionally right.
Yeah.
And so I personally, and I've taught this a lot, seen massive results just from that different frame of thinking. Let's work progressively backwards. And remember, I wasn't saying based on my 5-year goal, what am I going to do this week? I was based on my monthly goal, what am I going to do this week? As you progressively get closer to today, we get clearer and clearer about how we should be behaving. And by the way, between now and 5 years, we'll be a heck of a lot clearer. So you get to course correct along the way as well.
Yeah. Let's talk about that, course correcting. If things change or if something's not working, or maybe your one thing changes entirely, to use your example of the pilot. Can you talk about how that is best handled?
We wrote a book, and the subtitle was The Extraordinarily Simple Truth Behind Extraordinary Results. So it's a book about being successful, right? Results. And the simplest definition we could agree on was success is getting what you want. And the challenge for most people is they actually don't know what they want.
Right.
I do believe that the best way to find out is to pick something and go try it. So do you think I want to be a pilot? Well, let's go study that. We did this in college, right? I'll go take some classes in the arts and science. I'll go take an engineering course. And you're trying to figure it out, which path you need to stick on. You can talk to people, whatever it takes, but experience is often the thing that teaches us the fastest. So I do think it's totally natural that your one thing might change over time. And when it does, you just want to be aware of that, acknowledge it, and then reset. Mm-hmm. I thought I was going to be a pilot. I actually want to be a flight assistant. And based on that, what do I need to be doing to hit my someday goal in 5 years, in 1 year, and you work your way backwards.
Right.
So I think you just have to interrogate, why am I switching? I do this with my staff. Hey, I've decided to change the big goal. If they're changing it because they're unwilling to do the activities, but it's still what they want, then we're just going to increase the accountability. If we're changing it because what we were aiming at doesn't actually matter, I'm totally cool with that. We need to be aiming at things that matter to the business or to our lives, and not doing it because someone else said so or our parents expected it. It's got to matter.
Yeah.
If it matters, we double down. If it doesn't matter, we can move on. That would be kind of one of my immediate. When someone says I'm changing the goal, my team knows that I get real curious real fast.
Yeah. Yeah, and I suppose you could also lower the threshold, instead of saying, oh, I need to be a teacher, for example. And then along the way you realize, oh, maybe I actually just want to, be a writer. I want to share ideas, but maybe in a different way, or I want to have strong relationships or something like that. It's weird
to talk about lowering it. Lowering a goal, right, unless it's a purely objective target, like I'm going to sell $100,000 worth of widgets this year.
Yeah.
I usually also push back. I'd rather fail and learn from the failure than lower the goal so I can hit it. So there is a point at which a goal is so big that we shut down and don't do anything. And that is something, especially when we're working with kids, we need to acknowledge that it can be overwhelming. But if you started the year thinking you were going to sell $100,000 worth of widgets and you look up and, hey, it's July and I haven't sold 50,000 yet, maybe I need to lower my target. That's a nuanced discussion for me. Mm-hmm. In terms of achievement, I want to keep aiming at the goal and ask the question, well, based on the gap I have, what do I need to change about my activities in order to hit the goal? Yeah. And then based on that, am I willing to do it? If it doesn't seem possible and I'm not willing, in the business, you then have to ask, well, if I was planning on $100,000 in revenue from selling those widgets and I'm going to get 70,000, I also now need to realistically acknowledge that maybe I have to cut my expenses. So there's a lot of conversation that goes in there, but I don't, my team knows this. I really don't like people lowering the goal just so they can hit it.
Yeah. I guess what I meant was maybe lower was the wrong word, but I meant, I guess, broadening the threshold, and maybe it doesn't apply as much with an objective business goal, but if it's like a life outlook goal of I want to have strong relationships, or I want to have meaningful connections in my community, instead of saying I need to be the mayor of my town or something like that.
Totally. And I think that's totally fair. And, when people say that, I want to have meaningful relationships, I think that's a great outcome. And then immediately I would start asking the question, what do you think is the one thing you can do, an activity, such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary in order to have better relationships?
Yeah. And that is the definition, right? That's the one thing definition.
That is the focusing question. It's you're really trying to zone in on the core activity that gives you the results. And if there's a challenge I see with most people's approach to goal setting, is that we have goals, and then when we're tracking our goals, we never translate them into activities.
Right.
So at the end of the day, if I want to make $100,000 this year, that's an outcome goal. What I need to focus on every week and every month is, did I do the activities that are most likely to get me there? Make the sales calls, or build the widgets, or do the podcast, right? It's almost always it's got to translate into activities otherwise it just doesn't happen.
Yeah. I think it's a good segue to talk. The part of the book I think that has stuck with me the most after having read it is the chapter called The Success Habit, where you touch on the importance of having goals in various realms of your life. So it's not just professional, it's not just financial. There's also relational goals, personal goals, spiritual goals, health goals. So I appreciate how you touched on those things, to acknowledge the complexity of our lives and how it's important to tend to various legs of the chair, so to speak. So why don't we dive into that?
Sure. You're talking about the only page that I actually have memorized in the whole book.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's page 114 in the American hardcover edition is the 7 circles. And at one point, after we had acknowledged that there's this question, what's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else is easier and necessary? That's the cue, right, to our mind to identify that activity that gets us what we want. You don't just do that in business. And in fact, business is not even the first area for us. So we identified 7 areas in order of importance that we feel like you would address and build habits around your one thing in order to have the best possible life. And for us, and this is where it's a little subjective, for us it began with your spiritual life, right? If you're not tending to that garden, people tend to look up late in life and have real crises. So, if you haven't answered that question, it's a great place to start. It's the one thing for my physical health. Your health is the foundation of everything else that you want to do. And you can borrow against it, but there's almost always a payback time. So tending to that as a foundational kind of habit in your life is really important.
Yep.
Your personal life. A lot of people skip this one. They don't have hobbies. They don't take time just for themselves. But if you don't do those things, there's a real price to pay, and it often shows up in our health. It shows up as burnout, or we have breakdowns. And I've had lots of working moms and parents say, how can you ask me to you haven't even talked about my kids, and you're telling me to work on my spiritual life, my physical health, and my personal hobbies? And I remind them that when you're in an airplane, you've heard the spiel a million times. If the air masks deploy in an emergency, do you put it on yourself or the child next to you first? You put it on yourself, because if you don't, you may pass out and you'll both die.
Right.
So we do have to do a little bit of self-care in order to care for the people that matter most. And people who neglect that, they may not be there when those people need them the most.
Right.
So after personal life, we do key relationships, and then we talk about job, business, and finance. So the I love that page, and I love it when people ask and identify what their one thing is in each of those areas. And I love it even more when I hear that they've been purposeful and built really great habits in each of those areas. My one word of caution is, and I've seen people make this mistake many times, is they're now on page 114 and they've forgotten what the title of the book is. The title of the book is The One Thing, not the 7 things.
Yeah.
So if you're going to pursue each of those areas, you have to do it one at a time. So pick the area of the highest priority and then start there. Figure out what your one thing is, build a ritual or a habit around it so that it's now self-sustaining, and then move to the next. That is what we feel is the best way to approach that.
And a couple things come to mind. One being the domino effect, and when you mentioned, putting the air mask on yourself first, brings to mind just the idea of using health as an example, or your finances. The idea that you have to get your own house in order, and then in order to then be of service to the people around you. So if you're unhealthy, you're going to be focused on how unhealthy and lethargic or sick you are before you can really expect to do anything helpful for people around you. And so the domino effect, which you reference in the book as well, it's like once you knock down the domino of good health, now all of a sudden you have more energy to then think about how you can be a better friend or brother or son or father or sister, how you can be a better employee or boss. And then it just sort of off to the races in an upcycle of favorable behavior, which I think is important to acknowledge that these things don't stand on their own.
Very true. They are interrelated, and there is this domino effect. And then if people don't have the book, they can't see the page, but it looks like a hockey stick basically on its side. And when we were looking at all of the stories, business stories and personal stories of extraordinary success, when you look at them, it's kind of an exponential geometric growth. It looks like nothing's happening until you hit the elbow of the curve, and then things really take off. And if you've ever been on a diet or trying to change a health habit, you'll be going to the gym day after day, and you almost feel like you're moving in the wrong direction. Maybe you're heavier on the scale, and then 2 or 3 months down the road, somebody will say, wow, you've really lost a lot of weight. And then it starts to show up really quickly. Most things in life act that way. It feels like we're moving so slowly, we're succeeding so slowly, we're failing. And really, we need to understand that that's what big success looks like. You're laying a huge foundation, and on that foundation gets really kind of geometric growth. So it snowballs, and bad habits snowball too, right? If your habit is that you like to finish every day with a bacon cheeseburger, you're going to feel really happy watching Netflix for the first few weeks. And then you're going to start feeling lethargic, and then you're going to be in the doctor's office, and then you're going to be dead. And that last little bit is going to happen fast, right? Because unhealthy habits also tend to snowball and grow bigger really shockingly fast. You ignore it until it's so big, it's really now a really big challenge.
And in your experience, what have you seen to be the biggest trouble for people, at least when they're getting started building their lives around this kind of premise of the one thing?
I think a lot of people intuitively know that they should be focused on less. It's very, very hard for them to trust that all those other things on the list aren't as important as they think they are, or that if they do the most important thing, people will let them off the hook for the others. So there is a little bit of an act of faith there. It's one of the reasons why we talk about thinking big but starting small. It always comes back to the calendar for me. If you put it on your calendar and you make sure that your calendar is your boss, it's going to happen. The odds go up from the mid-30s to the high 90s when people actually calendar their commitments. So I usually say, all right, so you want to be an author, Ty? Great. Let's look today and let's look at your calendar and let's find a time that you feel like you could every day write. If nothing else, you open up your computer, open up your word processor, and you type one word. When would that be? And hopefully it's early in the day while you still have control of your time and you still have all your willpower to focus on what you want to do. And we start with that small window of time. Let's just time block 15 minutes or 30 minutes. And when people do that and realize that they actually can take back control of this tiny block of time in their day, we find that there's a halo effect that kicks in fairly quickly. they start to get confidence. They realize that, wow, I can take back control. And they're surprised at how much progress they can make with that small block of time. And they'll start adding to it. And so I usually just ask people, so go from a half hour to an hour and from an hour to 90 minutes. And if you're really committed to making a career of this, before long, you'll be spending a few hours a day doing it. And then you'll look up and you'll have a novel or whatever it is.
Right.
But it is about taking those steps in order instead of jumping straight to the finish line. When people jump straight to, I'm going to write 3 hours a day, they fail really quickly, and then they move on to other pastures.
Yeah.
It can be demoralizing. So starting with what you can do and building momentum is a really important part of the recipe.
Yeah, and similar to taking care of your health, I think a common misconception is, I got to go to the gym for 2 hours every day and go on some wild restrictive diet. But in reality, if you're just setting aside 20 minutes in the morning to go for a walk, even something very attainable, you can kind of get the ball rolling in the right direction. And similarly with finance, maybe set aside a certain percentage of every paycheck to go into a savings account. Something as simple as that can be done automatically. And then all of a sudden a year's gone by and, without much work on your part, you've put away some money for a rainy day. It's relatively simple, as you said at the beginning. It's just a matter of taking the time to be intentional about it.
Well, I love the financial example because you also get the compounding that I'm wanting to describe. The 401k is built on that. You decide to set aside 5%, maybe you're really ambitious, 10% of your paycheck with the match. And the first few times you get your paycheck, you notice that money is missing. Before long, you're not even aware that it's missing. So silently in the background, this habit that you've made automatic is investing money. And over time, we know that that's going to compound at a certain rate, depending on who sold you your plan, 8% or 12%. And it doesn't look like much in a 5-year or a 10-year run, but if you roll that out 40 years, it's kind of amazing what happens.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you nailed it on the head there.
I'm just trying to think of the different types of audiences that might be listening and sort of playing devil's advocate because, you're the brain behind this premise. You've been successful in your career. Maybe they might say, okay, well, sure, you're the master of your time because you can be, but I'm a new employee or, younger. I'm trying to make a mark, and I'm sort of at the beck and call of my employer or my clients. What would you say to that?
Well, I think Gary gets this more than I do. He's the self-made billionaire, and I'm his willing mentor and partner and on my own path.
Yeah.
But people say, oh, you can do that because you're Gary Keller. And his retort is, no, I'm Gary Keller because I do that.
Right.
And I always have. And I think a lot of people are waiting for someone to give them permission to be successful when they really just need to take initiative. And there's that old, phrase, apologize later. There's a little bit of that here, right? As long as we're working within ethics and legality and don't apologize later for robbing the bank. That doesn't work. But no one is getting a raise for perfect attendance in meetings. They're going to get a raise for what they do when they're not in meetings, and that's delivering results. So people look at their calendars and they see all of their obligations, and you have to ask, which ones of these are truly obligations? Where can I get clever? Can I have someone take notes for me at this meeting and actually get some of my really most important work done? Can I just decline the invitation? What happens? I'm sorry, I can't meet with you at that time. One of the tricks of time blocking that we referred to earlier, you know what your one thing is. You've blocked an hour or so to do it every morning. When someone sends you an invite to do something else, you can now very truthfully say, hey, Ty, I'm so sorry. I cannot do it at 8 a.m. I have a standing appointment until 10 a.m. Could you do it later? Most people are never going to ask you what your standing appointment is or who it's with. And don't tell them I'm writing from 8 to 10 o'clock, because then they will ask for that time. But if you say, I'm sorry, my calendar is already got a commitment on my calendar at that time. Could I meet you at 11 o'clock or 2 o'clock? Would one of those work? Nobody's ever going to circle back. So there are some skills we can learn for protecting our time, for saying no. And most no's, especially in businesses where you have a boss, are not really no's, they're not nows or under these conditions.
Yeah.
Your boss says, I need this. Don't say when. Because if you say when, they're going to say now. You can say, hey, can I get this to you Tuesday? Most of the time, I would say 95% of the time when you get dumped on, they just want to know that you got it.
Yeah.
Say, got it, boss, and I get back to you on Tuesday. 95% of the time, they're going to nod their head. In that rare instance, they say, no, I'm sorry, I need it right now. Great, I'm on it, boss. That doesn't happen that often.
Right.
So learn to protect your time. If you've time blocked your commitments, that's the first step. And then protect those commitments.
Yeah, and speaking of time blocking, I'm cognizant of the clock here, and I want to make sure that we leave adequate time, Jay, to touch on how you've applied it in your life, because I think that more examples will be helpful for people kind of as they contextualize this premise. But you being the inventor or the presenter, at least, of this idea, how have you applied it over the years?
So Gary and I spent almost 4.5 years researching the book and writing it before it came out. So I look up now and I've got more than a decade of experience living a lot of the principles in this book. And when you think about kind of some of the language we've talked about, you identify the thing that matters most. And wherever appropriate, you build a habit around that thing. And the amazing thing about habits is, in our research, it takes about 66 days on average to form one. Quitting smoking, by the way, takes a lot longer.
Yep.
But drinking 8 glasses of water might take a little less. But on average, you're going to give it a little bit more than 2 months. The amazing thing is, when you work really hard to build the habit of maybe drinking more water every day, or going to bed at 10 p.m., or whatever that habit is, the moment it's formed, it takes very little energy or thought to maintain it. Chances are this morning, I hope this is true, you got up and you brushed your teeth. And you didn't have to think about that. That's something that your parents nagged you about for probably the first 8 or 9 years of your life in order for you to do habitually for the rest of your life. And there are very few health habits that have extended our life more than our dental health. It's one of the reasons we don't all die at age 40. Is dental health. It's amazingly important. So you've got that. You build a habit. So in my life, as I started to understand, wow, that's the Superman formula. That's the Superwoman formula. I focus on one thing, I build a habit, and then I can add another habit, and I can add another habit. And you look up in 5 or 6 years and people go, wow, how do you do it all? Well, I did it all sequentially is how I did it. So my wife and I came up with, outside of our professional goals, we came up with some commitments that we wanted to make together and as a family. And they happened in kind of organically in order. We started with our health. So for now, about 7 years, we've been working out 3 times a week. We get up, today's a Friday. We can wake up at 5:10. By 5:30, we're at the gym. We work out for an hour. And we've been doing that for over 7 years. And that's I thought that was a health goal. It's been one of the best relationship things we've ever done, is to do that together.
Right.
We had 2 kids, 16 months apart. Our second child was colicky. When you have 2 in diapers and the second one's colicky, it's very hard on your relationship. And I remember Gary giving us advice. He goes, as soon as you think you can have a babysitter, y'all need to institute a date night. And I was like, really? He goes, oh, yeah. Mary, his wife, and I, we have a date night. When John, his son, was old enough, we had a guys' night out. You just build rituals. And I was like, wow, I love that idea. So if you look at our calendar, if you interviewed my people, they would tell you that for at least, I'm going to say 13 years, we had been going on date nights on Wednesday night. And that's to better improve our relationship. I like to think of it as a little reminder about why we had the kids in the first place, right? So this past Wednesday, we celebrated our 20th anniversary, and we did it on a Wednesday night. And
Congrats.
People go, why Wednesday? Thank you, Ty. If you have small children, you know the answer. If you don't, you're like, why Wednesday? It's not to split up the week. If you have small kids and you're trying to build a habit, right, a regular habit of going out on a Friday or Saturday night, you're competing with the rest of the world for the babysitters. So we didn't have family in town. We didn't have that privilege of having grandma come over. So we picked a weeknight after discovering that Fridays and Saturdays were very hard to build a habit around. And guess what? There was always a babysitter available on a Wednesday night. There was no competition. And it actually has turned out pretty good. So we have a gratitude habit with our kids. It's in our spiritual thing. Every night we eat dinner as a family. We already had that habit. And now we join hands and we ask, what's one thing you're thankful for? What I love is my kids will do that when I'm not there. They just look, ask a total stranger, hey, what are you thankful for today? We wanted to build the habit of gratitude. So I could go down the list of habits that we've built with our family and with each other. But we built them one at a time. And we made a commitment to say, hey, let's really make this thing happen. And once we felt like it stopped, we could ask, well, what do we want to do next? But that's how it's shown up in my lifetime.
Yeah, I love it. And thanks for sharing, Jay. And favorite part about it is it's the reminder, the truth that it's an action. It's a choice and an action on you, and no one's going to do it for you. And that you're at the helm of kind of picking which of these habits, which of these actions you're going to apply to your own life. And once that starts sort of unlocking these different realizations, it's like you have turbo mode as you're moving through the world.
It really is. And I love what you said. If the thing that makes me happiest is when people try to build one habit and they're successful at it, suddenly they have this amazing sense of agency. I was working with one of my partners who's helping us on a project. And he's like, what is it like for people that are really, so-called successful, and how is it that they show up at your door? And I said, the thing they describe, and I'm summing up 1,000 conversations so often, we hear it in our trainings, we hear it in our coaching, is it's a sensation of, if you've ever gone whitewater rafting and fallen out of the boat, you're in the rapids, and all you can think about is just getting your feet pointed downstream and keeping your head above water. And it's that feeling of just constantly being in triage mode, survival mode. And when you feel a sense of agency and empowered, it's such an amazing gift to people, because then they start realizing they've got oars in both hands. They just have to start rowing. They're not actually out of the boat. They were just drifting in the current of other people's priorities. So I love hearing agency. You are the author of what you choose to build in your life, and people need to feel that agency.
And I think your book and your work is certainly a solid and applicable introductory portal to do just that. So I want to thank you again for writing it, and then also, of course, for being on the show and your willingness to discuss it. Much appreciated. And I think the listeners will agree and get a lot out of it as well. And then hopefully go check out the book themselves if they haven't already. It's called The One Thing. And you also, Jay, have a website. Is there anywhere else we can find you?
Well, I was going to say, I'm always thrilled and flattered if people want to buy our book. That's great. We have a lot of free resources on theonething.com. That's with the number 1. And we have a podcast of our own called The One Thing. So if you look it up, my partner Jeff hosts it. And all he's doing is very transparently sharing stories about how this shows up in your day-to-day. So that's absolutely free. So as much as I'd love to have more people buying our books, I just want people to be living the book.
Yep. And while I have you, are there any other books or cultural references that had a particular impact on you or that helped you out along the way?
I've got like a whole bookshelf, like with 4 shelves on it of like my favorite books, which are kind of, that's a longer story because I read a lot. That's part of my professional job description, is to constantly be researching. There's a book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield that I often keep copies of and give away. It's ostensibly for writers, battling the resistance to doing what you need to do, but it works for entrepreneurs as well. There's a book called Managing Oneself by Peter Drucker. It's real short. I think it's really solid. I've got a few books out there. Those are the first 2 that come to mind.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for sharing those. This is Jay Papasan on the Jalapeno Podcast. Thank you, Jay, again for being on. I'm a fan of the work, and it's been helpful for me.
Thanks, Ty. I appreciate it. And thanks for sharing the message with your audience.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. Thank you to Aaron Mason, Caitlin Watkins, for your creative contribution to this episode. Thank you to Nave Espacial as well for the music. that's it for now, and we will connect with you next time on the Jalapeno Podcast. This is Ty, your host, and thanks for tuning in.